Good morning. And I see a lighter group. I'm reminded of a story of a rancher who went to, of a circuit preacher who would go around this wide circuit of churches out west. And one day he and his wife get to this one little church, and only one rancher shows up. And he's kind of looking at him and says, "Well, what do you think we should do?" And the rancher said, "Well, if I went out to feed my cattle and only one showed up, I would feed it." And the pastor thought, "Well, that's a word from God, so let's go ahead. We'll do the full service." And they had an opening prayer, a couple of songs, took up a collection, and then he gave his sermon. Then they finished up with another couple of songs and a closing prayer. And when he was done, he said, "Well, what'd you think? How was that?" And the rancher said, "Well, I told you, if only one of my cattle showed up, I would feed it. I didn't say I'd give him the whole truckload." So one other thing that Zach just reminded me of when he's talking about my upbringing and life out west, this is April 19th. And April 19th of 1977 is deep inside the Grand Canyon on a backpacking trip, is where I gave up my life as an atheist and started following this strange God that we have that loves us more than we can imagine. So it's a birthday of sorts. And I really love that last song, Fount of Every Blessing, especially the wandering heart, prone to wander, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart. Take and seal it for thy courts above. And that's what I'm going to pray about for this morning. My Lord and my God, I thank you for this day and for everyone that's here. I ask your blessing on this message and pray that it is heard by those who need it most. Amen. So this morning I'm going to be in Luke 15, beginning on verse 11, talking about the far country. Now, Luke 15 has got three really great stories in it. The first one is about a lost coin, and then a lost shepherd, and then the last one is about a lost son who goes out to see the far country. And when you think of when that term comes up to you, the far country, what do you think about? Is it a tropical beach somewhere with sapphire blue water and nice little breeze, someplace where you have no responsibilities and just do whatever you want? Or perhaps in the mountains somewhere, snow-capped peaks, rushing streams and crystal clear water? Or do you think of something like a lot of college kids right now, spring break on Tybee Island with 100,000 of your closest friends? Well, I'm going to spend, like I said, Luke 15, 11 through 32. And since I first became a Christian, this has always been one of my favorite stories. It's a simple one of someone who sinned and walked away from God and came back, and of another who served God but resented it the whole time. And if you've been around any church for very long, you've undoubtedly heard a message on this passage before. Zach's taught on it and very well. This painting, I don't know who the artist is, but I really like it because it conveys the emotion of this story of the son returning to his father. And in preparing, one other little comment on the side, I read about a pastor who actually did a 16-week series on this passage. And at the end of that 16-week series, one of the ladies of the church came up to him and said, "Pastor, I am so sorry that poor boy ever ran away from home." So let me read from Luke 15, 11:32. Then he said, "A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me.' So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after that, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed the swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned before heaven and against you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to be merry. Now his older son was in the field, and he came and drew near the house. He heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what these things meant. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf.' But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered to his father, 'Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him.' And he said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found.'" Some years ago, in the period of time between World War I and World War II, a visitor, a biblical scholar, went to the Middle East, and he traveled around to a lot of the small villages there in what was then known as Palestine. And despite assertions to the contrary by some these days, the Jewish people have maintained a continuous presence in what is now Israel throughout the last millennia. And after telling the story, he would ask them, "Could this happen here in this village? Is this how people would react?" And without exception, and in every instance, he was told no. To begin with, the son had asked the father for his inheritance. And in this society that had the same values as those that Christ had spoken to, this amounted to saying, "Dad, I wish you were dead." Deuteronomy 21, beginning in verse 18, provides the following solution to this kind of a son. "If a man has a stubborn and a rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastened him, will not heed him, then his father and mother should take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of a city, to the gate of his city. And they shall say to the elders of the city, 'This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard.' Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death with stones. So ye shall put away the evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear." Pretty harsh treatment. But the father did not do this. Instead, we are told that he divided his property and gave the younger one his share. Most of the people at this time, of course, they lived on small plots of land that had been passed down from generation to generation, beginning from when the Israelites first came to the Promised Land. And a man's wealth, it was typically measured by the amount of land you own, your livestock, and your servants. and it would be passed down from father to oldest son. And you know, that sounds kind of cruel to the younger ones, but you got to think, you know, if we kept on dividing it equally, pretty soon people would be farming this piece of land the size of a postage stamp. So that's the way they kept it as productive and within one area. But in this case, in order to give the younger son his inheritance, he would have had to have sold off some of his land to raise the money. And by selling off some of that property, he would be diminishing what he had available to provide for his own family. But he did it, and he gave his son his inheritance. And doing so would have also subjected the father to ridicule and humiliation by others in the village. You know, what was he thinking? Doesn't he know anything about raising kids and discipline? Hasn't he read Deuteronomy? With the money in hand, the younger son set out for the far country. And the far country was more than likely a non-Jewish area as the story continues. We read that he squandered his money in loose living. And I think we can all imagine what he did. The prostitutes, drunkenness, just having a good time and finding himself. But after a while, the money ran out and famine hit the land. Now you must understand that when famine hit, there's no relief from government agencies, no international organizations to bring anything in. When famine hit, you were on your own. And to escape dying, he hit rock bottom as far as the Jews were concerned. Excuse me. And so remember that so far, he had insulted his father, deprived his family of money, embarrassed his family in front of the entire village, engaged in a variety of sinful activities, and in short, rejected everything that he had ever been taught or grew up with. And he did all this in the name of, I did it my way. So of course, he took a job feeding the pigs. Debbie's uncle ran a farm in Iowa. They grew corn and raised hogs. And we went to visit him there once, and one morning he came to me and said, hey, I could use a hand. My tractor's stuck. Can you give me a hand? And I said, yeah, sure. And he said, did you bring any boots with you? And I actually had my work boots with me. And I said, yeah. And he said, let me see them. And I held them up, and he said, those won't do. And he went away and came back a minute later and brought a pair of waders that came up to here. His tractor, and this is a big four-wheel drive John Deere tractor, was stuck in a pile of pig manure. And if you can imagine that, green, slimy, squishy, infested with flies, we got the tractor unstuck, but by the time we were done, we looked pretty defiled. I'll spare you the rest of the details. As bad as that was, to a Jew, touching a pig was automatic defilement. Leviticus 11 states that to even touch a pig made you unclean and not fit to touch anyone else. Further, in the name of his much desired freedom from his family and society, he was now reduced to working for a foreigner, doing things that his father would never had him do. And he was hungry, so hungry that he would have gladly have eaten the food that he was feeding the pigs, but no one gave him anything. And it was at this point that he came to himself. In other words, he realized what he had been doing, what he had done to his father and against God. He confessed the sins and decided on a course of action so that he might live. He would go back and confess to his father and ask for a job as a hired hand, and this he did. I like to imagine the scene as he came home. You know, he's been on the road for a while, he's dirty, he's filthy, covered in rags, stinking of pig manure, perhaps sweaty and covered with dust from the long walk back, all the time wondering what kind of reception he would get when he got home. And I find it extremely interesting, even strange, that his father is outside of the village looking down the road, looking for him at this time. How long had he been there? Was this something that he did every day since his son had left? But he's there. and he recognizes his son at a distance. And he begins to run down the road holding up his robe. And have you ever tried running with a robe? I think gals can understand this better than most guys. They're used to it with a skirt or a dress. But, you got to pull it up quite a ways so you can move your legs and have freedom of movement. And of course, for a father in those days to do that, pulling up, you're exposing your bare legs, which is pretty indecent. And then running down the road to greet his son. And grown men, the head of the household, they didn't run. Children ran, slaves ran, servants ran, wives sometime ran, but not dad. It would have been humiliating. But the father ran until he came to his son, and he hugged him and he kissed him, completely overjoyed at the return of his son. And this wasn't one of those guy hugs where you go up and one arm around the other's shoulder, 3 taps and release, you're done. That was my hug. This is one of those full-bodied embraces that you can just imagine. When Debbie and I were first married, we were in college. And in the summers, I had a job as a seasonal firefighter for the Forest Service. And the first time I came home from a fire, I was black from head to toe. I mean, completely black. Looked like some of those pictures you see of coal miners. Sweaty and grimy and dirty. Debbie wouldn't even let me in our apartment until I'd taken everything off outside and then walked in straight to the shower. As it turns out, the father's embrace and his kiss of forgiveness was the only thing that would have saved his son from the wrath of the village. It was an undisputable act of forgiveness to his son in front of everyone. There was a book I read an excerpt of by Ken Bailey, The Cross and the Prodigal. And he explains how on returning home, the son would have likely faced the prospect of something called the kazaza ceremony. And this was something that was a feature of ancient Judaism, and it's written about in the Talmud. And the kazaza ceremony that a Jewish village would hold is something they would hold in exactly this circumstance. Someone had left home, rejected the community's principles, lost all of their possessions to the Gentiles, and then returned. The villagers would bring pottery out, and they would break it at the foot of the individual, symbolizing that they're no longer in community with them. And they were breaking relations with him as a way of shaming that individual, of making him feel completely empty. And importantly, the ceremony would take place outside the village before that person had entered and come back home. When you think about it, it's really not too different from other acts of church discipline. The Amish, they practice something called shunning. And that occurs when an individual has violated church rules and been excommunicated from the Amish church. And shunning is a form of social avoidance or change public social behavior. It's an alteration of our behavior towards an individual who has willfully violated rules of the church. Excommunication, and it's practiced by the Catholic Church and other churches. Within Catholicism is considered one of the most severe punishments the church could levy against anyone. They used it to enforce doctrinal orthodoxy and discipline amongst the clergy and laity alike. And being excommunicated meant that you could no longer take communion, which they believed and taught was necessary for salvation. Several people you've heard of were excommunicated. Martin Luther, for one. There's a movie out right now, The Great Awakening, about George Whitefield, who is an English evangelist who came to America in around 1740. And he was excommunicated from the Anglican Church for his preaching and what he believed and taught. But getting back to the text, the son who had undoubtedly been practicing his lines every step of the way home said, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And it's interesting to note in Galatians 4, verses 6 and 7, that the father could not make him a hired servant. For a son is always a son and cannot become a servant. And quoting here, and because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of His Son into your hearts, crying out, Abba, Father. Therefore you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. His father in answer called to a servant, bring the best robe and put it on him, and a ring for his hand, and shoes on his feet. Now the best robe in the house was probably Dad's, and like our finest clothes, they probably only brought it out for special occasions. But it was really a lot more than that. Zechariah 3:3 and 4. Zechariah has got a vision of Joshua standing before the Lord in filthy rags, and you can read the following. Now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments and was standing before the angel. Then he answered and spoke to those who stood before him, saying, take away the filthy garments from him. And he said to him, he said, see, I have removed the iniquity from you, and I will clothe you with rich robes. In this scene, God has covered up the sins of the son with the best robe and removed his sins. The giving of the ring is also significant. It wasn't just decoration. It was probably a signet ring. And a signet ring was used to seal contracts and enter into agreements, marriage contracts, for instance. You would have the document there with wax, you'd press your signet ring in it, and that was your signature. And they used them extensively throughout those days. I remember reading a couple articles over the years. King Hezekiah and Boaz, they found their signet rings in archaeological excavations. But giving them the signet ring is the equivalent of giving them the checkbook, the credit cards, the keys to the safe deposit box, the keys to the kingdom, as it were. The signet ring, giving it to him, means you are my son. Shoes. They weren't worn by servants, and yet the father commands that some be placed on his son's feet. And then the father had the servants kill the fatted calf and prepare it. In those days, before refrigeration, if you cooked something, you pretty much had to eat it then and there because it would spoil so quickly. And something as large as a year-old calf, maybe 500-600 pounds dressed out, it's going to be a lot more than your average family is going to sit down to dinner for, unless maybe they have teenage boys at home. When the fatted calf was killed and cooked, it was for the entire village to come and take part in. It was a symbol of great rejoicing, normally reserved for marriages and things like that. And the entire village would have been invited. And to refuse would have been a great insult to the father and to the host family. It's at this time that Big Brother comes into the story. Coming home from working in the fields, he hears all the noise from the party. He stops one of his father's servants to ask what's going on. And when he learns that his good-for-nothing brother has come home and that Dad has invited the entire village to the party, he starts to get upset, and then he gets downright mad. I mean, can you blame him? How would you feel in this situation? But at this point, the father comes out and says, son, come on in and join the party. But the older brother refuses. Once again, a son insults his father in front of the entire village. He tells his father, look, I've worked for you all of my life, and I have never asked anything from you. I've never disobeyed you. And you never once even gave me some steak or some ribs that I could have my friends over for a barbecue. But this worthless brother of mine comes home, and you kill the fatted calf and you invite the whole world to the party. His father replied, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to make merry and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. When our middle son and our daughter were in high school, They were in a terrible traffic accident, and our son nearly died. And they got him to the hospital. They put him into a drug-induced coma for several days. Brought him out of it on my birthday, which will always remain the best birthday present I ever had. And although the context is different, I can understand the reaction of the father, just that overwhelming relief to have your son that you love so much return to you safe and sound. We're left without knowing if this son will come in to join the party or not. And what did the father mean when he said that his son was dead, but now he is alive? Ephesians 2:1 reads, "And you he made alive when you were dead through the trespasses and sins in which you once walked." You know, in this story, the focus, of course, is on the father's grace towards the repentant younger son. And while the older brother's grievances receive minimal direct attention, this omission serves a deliberate purpose. Jesus uses the older brother to challenge the self-righteous stance of those who resist God's mercy for repentant sinners. In Jonah, you all remember the story. God tells Jonah he wants him to go to Nineveh, and he wants them to preach to the people there and that they would repent and ask for God's forgiveness. And Jonah didn't want to go. Nineveh was a horrible place full of mean, cruel, sadistic people. And so, of course, Jonah runs. He sails away, takes a cruise, gets tossed overboard, gets brought back to the shore by a whale and spit out on the ground. And so I'll pick it up. He then goes to Nineveh, and he preaches to the city, and the people repent. So I'll pick it up there. Then God saw their works, that they had turned from their evil way, and God relented from the disaster that he had said he would bring upon them. He did not do it, but it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he became angry. So he prayed to the Lord and said, "Ah, Lord, was not this what I said when I was still in my country? Therefore I fled previously to Tarshish, for I know that you are a gracious and merciful God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, one who relents from doing harm. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." Then the Lord said, "Is it right for you to be angry?" And the passage goes on to tell of a plant that grows quickly and provides shade for Jonah, and then it dies, and Jonah's angry again. And the sun beat down on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. Then he wished death for himself and said, "It is better for me to die than to live." And then God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" And he said, "It is right for me to be angry, even to death." But the Lord said, "You have had pity on the plant for which you have not labored, nor made it grow, which came up in a night and perished in a night. And should I not pity Nineveh?" By leaving the older brother's response unresolved, the story, invites us to examine ourselves. We've got to decide, are we going to celebrate God's compassion or resent it? And the key is to recognize that ultimate joy lies in the Father's presence for all who acknowledge their need for his mercy. And the older brother also symbolizes the Pharisees' attitude towards Christ, eating with tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus answered and said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." So there's a lot to be learned from this story, and just 3 points. The first is the depth of God's love for you and me. As with the prodigal son, and of course, the prodigal means wasteful. God is ready and willing to take us back if we but come to our senses and turn around for home. God will allow us to waste everything, our families, our homes, even our lives, in wandering in the far country. Our wanderings don't have to be, dramatic or startling to qualify as wandering away from God, from serious crimes, murder, rape, lying, cheating, stealing. You can also include lesser sins, like ignoring God, being blind to those in need, and serving ourselves first. Where are you now in your walk with the Lord? Are you just now setting out from home, anxious to see the sights and sounds of the far country, of the other side of life? Somewhere far away from where God wants you, and where you only answer to yourself? You all know there's no escape from God. Remember Jonah. He tried sailing away. Or are you now suffering in that far country, far from the love of God? Have you found what you wanted? I never did. Told you, today's my anniversary. I wandered long and far from God before turning to Him. The only thing I found in that was emptiness and loneliness. Coming back, I have family. Anywhere in the world that I go to where there is a church service, a Christian church service, I automatically have family. I've got all of you here. Like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, after running away from home and having a variety of adventures, she discovers there's no place like home. And of course, you don't need ruby slippers to come home either. No matter what you've done or where you are in life, God is waiting to take you back. He wants you back. And just as the Father came running to His Son and embraced Him and kissed Him, forgiving Him by those actions, in just the same manner, God will rejoice at our return. And don't try to come to God in your own terms when I'm all cleaned up. Just as the Father in that story runs down, embraces His Son who is dirty and filthy and defiled, that's how God will take us back. If we try to do it on our own, it's like you have a little child and they're playing in the mud all day, and they say they'll come in when they get cleaned up. That's never going to happen. You have to bring them in, toss them in the tub, and soak them. And as Billy Graham used to say, come to Him just as you are, and He'll do the cleaning. My second point deals with bitterness. Are you the older brother in this story? Have you never left God, yet you do not know happiness? Are you mad at God for giving others who don't deserve it? Or are you serving God out of fear or out of love? Are you bitter about some relationship or something that happened in your past? Bitterness, it's a poison, a bitter poison. It's mentioned at least 100 times in the Bible, and here's just 3 examples. Job 21. Yet another man dies in the bitterness of his soul, having never tasted anything good. Proverbs 14. The heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy. And then Psalm 64. There are those who sharpen their tongues like swords and aim their bitter words like arrows. I've shared previously from here that I grew up in a dysfunctional family with an alcoholic and domineering father. His attitude is basically, there's one opinion in this house and it's mine. Anyone else, it's wrong. And growing up in that environment left my sisters, I have 2 older sisters, and I with a lot of very bitter and hurt memories. And although my parents are both gone now, one of my sisters is still consumed with bitterness and exhibits the same unforgiving spirit that our father did. And our conversations, whenever we would talk, always came back to how much she despised our father and how bad things were. She has not been able to move on from those memories at all. And while I can't forget that upbringing and those memories, I was able, when my father lay dying, I was able to sit with him and pray for him and forgive him for those things that he had done to me. You've got to put bitterness behind you. You know, God wants us to be joyous in his house. He doesn't mean for us to go around stoically as though we were suffering from some disease. In Philippians 4, Paul instructs us to rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. When Paul said to rejoice, he's not saying you always need to be laughing or telling jokes or being silly, but rather to be encouraged and to celebrate in the love that God has for us. As with the older brother, God says to us, come on in. There's a party going on in here for one who was lost, who is dead, but is now found and is alive. For if anyone was insulted, it was God and not us. If God has forgiven the prodigal son, so should we. If you're holding a grudge against someone, maybe a family member or even someone in this church, forgive them when they return from the far country. Don't let bitterness grow in you. As C.S. Lewis once wrote, God expects us to forgive the unforgivable in others as he has already done for us. It also occurs to me that there is a fourth participant in this story. We've got the prodigal son, the older brother, and the father. And the fourth participant is the village. How did they react to all this? Their standards were violated by the actions of the son. They were also violated by the actions of the father in publicly forgiving the son. And they were also invited to the coming home party for that boy. To not attend would have been another insult to the father. In Matthew 22:1, and Jesus answered and spoke to them again by parables and said, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged the marriage for his son and sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding, and they were not willing to come. And again, he sent out other servants, saying, tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted calf are killed, and all things are ready. Come to my wedding. But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his own farm, another to his business. And the rest seized his servants, treated them spitefully, and killed them. When the king heard about it, he was furious, and he sent out his armies, destroyed those murderers, and burned up their city. Then he said to his servants, the wedding is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Therefore, go into the highways, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding. So those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all whom they found, both bad and good. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. Now, as village people, it could be us. We see someone who's strayed, and they've been forgiven by those who were hurt. Do we shun that person? Do we stay away from him, treat him differently? We see also someone filled with bitterness over wrongs committed in the past, whether they are real or imagined. Do we take the time to hear them out and hopefully help them get past that hurt? Now, God has invited us to that homecoming feast. Don't ignore the invitation. And as I'm closing here, I'm going to have Creighton play a song from several years ago, When God Ran by Benny Hester. It's about 5 minutes long, it's a video, but it's really well worth it because it conveys the depth of this story as far as I'm concerned. So bear with it, and Creighton, thank you.